If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. Another week, another few Chassidic stories, B'ezrat Hashem. This week I have 3 stories for you, God willing. But before I begin, I want to dedicate this podcast episode to the continued success of our soldiers in battle wherever they are, B'ezrat Hashem. May Hashem keep them all safe and help them to accomplish their missions. The refuah shlema, the full recovery of everybody who is ill or has been injured, the comforting of those that lost loved ones, and the continued unity of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel and all around the world, B'ezrat Hashem. The first story is about the Lelov Rebbe, Rebbe Moshe of Lelov. He was the son of Reb David of Lelov, who passed away in 1814, and of course was known for his incredible love for every Jew. Reb Moshe married the daughter of another great tzaddik, the Yid HaKadosh, the holy Yid of Pshischa, who passed away in 1813, and her name was Rivka Rachel. So after his father passed away in 1814, the Chassidim wanted Reb Moshe to become their Rebbe, but he didn't feel that he was worthy to be a Rebbe. And even though he kept saying no, people continued to come to him for blessings and advice. The year 1850 was a special time, because many Jews felt that Mashiach would be coming by 1850. And you might wonder why. At the time, the great Kabbalists had calculated that the years 1840 to 1850 could possibly be the time of redemption. And there were more and more Jews moving to the land of Israel, especially the students of the Vilna Gaon, who passed away in 1797. And those followers of the Vilna Gaon came to live in Jerusalem, where I am. And my chavuta, may ye live long and be healthy, B'ezrat Hashem, Aon ben Chana Liba, Refuah Shlema. He is one of the descendants of those followers of the Vilna Gaon that moved here in the late 1700s. So we had the calculation of the Kabbalists. We had Jews moving here at the encouragement of course, the Alter Rebbe also in the Vilna Gaon. And at the same time, life was getting harder for the Jews in Europe, which culminated, of course, we know, in the Holocaust. But back then, nobody knew what was coming. And with all the new troubles and persecutions, everybody thought that for sure, Mashiach must be coming. And it was in this atmosphere that Rebbe Moshe of Lelov felt that his neshama had to go to Eretz Yisrael. He had a feeling that if he could just get to the Kotel HaMa'aravi, to the Western Wall, and blow the shofar there, he'd be able to bring all the Jewish people back home from Galus and bring Mashiach. And so, after saving up the money, Rebbe Moshe was going to move to Eretz Yisrael. And he decided before he left Europe, he was going to say goodbye to some of the great tzaddikim of his day. And one of those was the Rizhiner Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Friedman. And the Rizhiner, of course, is one of the big Rebbes. And one of his things was living in wealth, which seemed like a contradiction. You know, we have great rabbis like Reb Zusha, who lived in poverty. But the Rizhiner, he lived in wealth, not because of the wealth itself, but to show the glory of the Torah. He wore very fancy clothes. He had a carriage with 4 white horses, gold boots with diamonds on them. And despite this outward display of wealth, the Rebbe was very humble and not actually connected to all the gashmiut, to the physicality. One winter night, when they went outside to do Kiddush Levana in the snow, the Rebbe was wearing his very fancy, luxurious boots. And the Chassidim noticed that there were bloodstains in the snow where the Rebbe had been standing. When they looked closer, they discovered that the extravagant boots that the Rebbe was wearing didn't have any soles on the bottom, meaning that the Rebbe was standing barefoot on the freezing ground. And so the Rebbe's lavish lifestyle was not for his own personal desires, but for the sake of heaven. And so Rebbe Moshe went to the Rizhiner Rebbe, and the Rizhiner Rebbe came from a very holy family. He was the grandson of Reb Avraham HaMalach, the angel, who was the son of the Maggid of Mezrich, who of course was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. So Reb Moshe wanted to say goodbye to the Rizhiner Rebbe, and when he showed up, the Rizhiner said, "Moshe, wait for me, I want to go with you." But Reb Moshe pointed to his white beard, saying that he was too old to wait and that he had to leave as soon as possible. Now, Rebbe Moshe had planned to move to Eretz Yisrael many times. He was planning on traveling with 10 people. And every time he saved up the money for the trip, and he had enough money saved up, somebody would come needing tzedakah. And of course, Rebbe Moshe couldn't say no to tzedakah, so he would give away all the money and have to start again. One day there was a woman who had been married for many years, and she didn't merit to have children. She came to Rebbe Moshe for a blessing. She said she needed a miracle because all the doctors told her she would never have children. So Rebbe Moshe said if she gave him a certain amount of money, which was exactly the money he needed for his trip to Eretz Yisrael, she would have a child. And she agreed right away. But Rebbe Moshe was very careful about these things. He told her that she has to speak with her husband first. Now her husband happened to be a chassid of a great tzaddik known as the Gitte Yid, which means the good Jew in Yiddish. His name was Rabbi David Tzvi Hertz Taub, and he passed away in 1864 and lived in Neustadt. And he was called the Good Jew because he was kind to everyone, and he had also learned from some of the great tzaddikim, including the Seer of Lublin and the holy Yid of Pshischa, who was of course the father of Rebbe Moshe's wife. So the husband, being a chassid of the Gitte Yid, went to his Rebbe and asked, what is he supposed to do? Should they give the money and get the bracha? And the Rebbe said, yes, give the money, but you need to ask for something else. The Rebbe said, when a child is born through a miracle, sometimes they don't live very long, chas v'shalom, God forbid. So make sure you ask when you give the money and receive the bracha that the child have a long life. And when the woman came back with the money and told the Rebbe, I'm willing to give you the money on the condition that you promise my child will have a long life, Rebbe Moshe said, that's a very important request. He closed his eyes for a minute, and then he said, your child will live as many years as the days I live in the Holy Land. And nobody understood what that meant, at least at the time. The Rishner later said something that revealed how special Rebbe Moshe was. He found a hidden meaning in the words of the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, where it says, Ein polin le'or haner, which means that you can't remove lice by the light of a lamp. And it's talking about things that you're not supposed to do by the candlelight on Shabbos. But the holy Rishner Rebbe read it differently. He said Polin sounds like Poland, and ner means light. So he read it to mean that the Polish Jews didn't understand what a great light they had let go when they allowed Rebbe Moshe to move to Eretz Yisrael. And on the boat to the Holy Land, Rebbe Moshe kept saying something that seemed strange to everybody who was traveling with him. He said, Yom l'shana, a day for a year. And people didn't understand, but later they realized that he was praying for each of his 74 years of life. And there was a miraculous story that happened on that boat trip. There was a leak in the bottom of the boat, and water started to come in, which of course is very dangerous and could sink the boat. But Rebbe Moshe took a simple piece of cloth, like a handkerchief, and put it over the hole, and the water simply stopped coming in. And when they arrived in the Holy Land, the family took the cloth, and it's kept in the family till today. All the brides in the family use it as their wedding veil. Now, Rebbe Moshe didn't travel alone. He had with him his son, Rabbi Eliezer Menachem Mendel, and his 6-year-old son, David Tzvi Shlomo. And when they got to the Holy Land, they landed in the port in Akko, in the north. But before going to the holy city of Jerusalem, Rebbe Moshe wanted to visit the holy places of the tzaddikim in Tzfat, in Tveria first, because he said once he reached Jerusalem, his heart would not let him leave. And so they went to Tzfat and Tveria. When they finally made it to Jerusalem, Rebbe Moshe was sick, and his children who traveled with him had to decide whether they were going to try to take him to the Kotel, even though he had no energy and he was so weak. They knew this was the reason that he'd come all this way, to pray at the Kotel, to blow the shofar, and bring Mashiach. So they said, we have to try. They put him on a stretcher and started walking through the old city, trying to get to the Kotel. But the Arabs in the old city would not let Jews reach the Kotel, and they started throwing rocks at them and wouldn't let them through. And they realized, with broken hearts, that they would not reach the Kotel that day. And 3 days later, feeling that the chance for redemption had been lost, Rebbe Moshe passed away. And he passed away on the 13th of Tevet in 1851, exactly 74 days after he arrived in Israel, which of course was what he was saying on the boat, Yom L'Shana, every day for each of the 74 years of his life that he would merit to be in the Holy Land. Before he passed away, Rebbe Moshe made 2 promises. He said that his yard site would always be good for bringing rain, so nobody would need to fast for rain before that date. Now, of course, you understand, in Jerusalem, there's no natural water source. So in the old days, before we had the modern technology that we have today, people had wells and big pools. And that was the water that they would live off of. And it came from the rain. So if it didn't rain, God forbid, people would die. And here in the land of Israel, we have a dry season and a rainy season. And if the rainy season didn't come, many times people would fast, sometimes for days, beseeching Hashem to send the rain. So Rebbe Moshe said his yard site would always be good for bringing rain. And this promise was taken so seriously by Rav Shmuel Salant, who was the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Jerusalem for almost 70 years, passing away in 1909. Rav Salant was one of the giant figures in Jerusalem who built many of Jerusalem's institutions and guided the community through difficult times. And he believed so strongly in Rebbe Moshe's promise that for 50 years he never called a fast for rain until after the 13th of Tevet. And Rebbe Moshe promised that anyone that makes even a small celebration on his yard site, even just having some cake and saying the Chaim, would get help with whatever they needed. So even though you'll be hearing this podcast episode after the yard site, it is in the same week of the yard site. So everybody say a little L'chaim for Rebbe Moshe. Be'ezrat Hashem, he'll daven for us in Shemayim. And of course you remember the woman that couldn't have children. She gave birth. And her child lived exactly 74 years. The same number of days that Rebbe Moshe lived in the Holy Land. We don't know exactly where on Har HaZeitim, the Mount of Olives, Rebbe Moshe is buried. But his blessings are still working today, still helping the people who need them, Be'ezrat Hashem. Now this story happened over 170 years ago, but there are still Elever Chassidim today who trace their lineage back to Rebbe Moshe, and they hold especially dear Rebbe Moshe's teaching about the power of giving tzedakah, how he himself gave away his travel money again and again, and how giving tzedakah ultimately made possible his final journey to the land of Israel and the miraculous birth of the woman who couldn't naturally have children. I have another story for you. This is a story about two great Jewish leaders who were imprisoned in the Soviet Union for trying to keep Judaism alive. And this was in the time when the communist government was trying to stamp out Jewish life. The first is Rebbe Moshe Goldman, who passed away in 1950 and later became the Grand Rebbe of Zvil, Yerushalayim. He came from a long line of Zviller Rebbes. His father and his grandfather, who was the first Zviller Rebbe. And Zvil Chassidus is known for its deep spiritual power and its care for every Jew. The second was Rabbi Chaim Shaul Bruk, who passed away in 1984 and would later become one of the most important teachers in Mashpi'im, mentors in Chabad Lubavitch. As a Mashpia, his job was to help others grow and be inspired to practice and live Judaism, which was exactly the reason that the Soviet authorities wanted to get rid of him. In those days, just teaching Torah or helping a person put on tefillin could put you in prison. The Soviets had built a network of prison camps called the gulag, where they sent anyone that they saw was a threat to their power. And many rabbis and Jewish leaders were sent to these camps where the conditions were terrible. It was freezing cold. There was hardly any food, and they had to do hard physical labor every day. One Shabbos, the commandant of their prison camp called Gedalia Moshe to his office. Now this man was known to be especially cruel, and he hated all Jews, but especially religious Jews. So he brings Rebbe Gedalia Moshe into his office and holds up some papers. And he says, I have here the papers for your release. If you sign them right now, you'll be a free man. But Rebbe Gedalia Moshe, he said, but sir, it's Shabbos. I can't sign papers on Shabbos, and I absolutely will not sign them on Shabbos. Now the commandant knew very well that religious Jews wouldn't sign anything on Shabbos, and that's why he decided to have this whole scene. He just wanted to torment Rebbe Gedalia Moshe. Then he shouted, if you don't sign these papers, you're going to stay here for another 8 years. And Rebbe Gedalia Moshe said, I will not sign the papers and desecrate the Shabbos. Very well, said the commandant. You don't sign the papers, you'll be in this prison for another 8 years, and then we'll see if your God helps you. And Rebbe Gedalia Moshe said, if Hashem wants to help me, he'll do it without you. And if he wants me to be in this prison for 8 more years, I'll be here for 8 more years, even if you decide to let me go. It has nothing to do with you. Well, that really upset the commandant. He jumped up from the table, pulled out his pistol, and pointed it right at Reb Gedalia Moshe's heart. And he said, "Let's see who's going to help you now, Jew." And then he cocked the pistol. And just then, his young daughter walked into the office. And she looked at the scene, her father pointing a gun at a Jewish prisoner. And she said in a bored voice, as if she'd seen this many times before, "Father, it's a waste of a bullet." And slowly the commandant lowered his gun. He said to Reb Gedalia Moshe, "Don't think that it was your God that saved you. If it hadn't been for my daughter, you'd be dead by now." Then he turns to one of his assistants and he says, "Bring in the other Jewish troublemaker, Chaim Shaul." A few minutes later, Reb Chaim Shaul is standing there next to Reb Gedalia Moshe, and the commandant says the same thing. "I have the papers for your release right here. Sign them right now, and you can go free." And Reb Chaim Shaul said, "Your Honor, I can't sign the papers. It's Shabbos, and I'm not going to break Shabbos." So the commandant said, "So you'll be here for another 8 years." And Reb Chaim Shaul said, "I will not write on Shabbos." And then Reb Gedalia Moshe spoke up and he said, "Give me the papers, I'll sign for him." The commandant couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said, "You wouldn't sign your own papers because you said you won't write on Shabbos and you're going to be here for another 8 years, but you'll sign for Chaim Shaul?" And Reb Gedalia Moshe said, "Of course I wouldn't sign papers for my own freedom on Shabbos, but this is different. I'm strong. I can handle another 8 years in prison. But Chaim Shaul, he can't stand this place any longer. If he stays here for another 8 years, Your Honor, give me the papers and let me sign them." Within a few days, both of the men were freed from prison because, as Reb Gedalia Moshe said, it had nothing to do with the commandant. And both men decided to rebuild Jewish life after their release. Reb Gedalia Moshe eventually made it to Jerusalem, where he reestablished the Zviller dynasty and was known as the Zviller Rebbe of Jerusalem. In his Beis Midrash, his study hall is on Rashi Street, became a center of Torah and Chassidus. And when he passed away in 1950, he was buried in a special small cemetery near now what is now Gan Saker. It was one of the first Jewish cemeteries inside of Jerusalem, outside of Har HaZeitim. And I can tell you that till today, many hundreds, thousands of people come every Monday and Thursday to daven at the grave of the Zviller Rebbe. And I know because we live about 10 minutes away from the Zviller, and my wife goes there many times, and I've been there myself. And the Zviller says if you come Monday, Thursday, and Monday, and daven, and give tzedakah, and say Tehillim, that he will go and daven for you in Shamayim. And once a miracle happens to you, you have to come back and say that you davened, and the miracle happened for you. And I can tell you, because I've been there are hundreds of pieces of paper going down the stairs and all around the grave area, of people saying miracles that happened to them. I remember one of them, I'll just mention it because it just came to mind. It was actually written in English, that's why it caught my attention. Here in Israel, we have a lottery system for government apartments, which means that you can buy an apartment at a very reduced rate. They're not building enough homes for everybody, but they're auctioning off these apartments. It doesn't cost anything, you just have to put in your name. This couple said that they tried 70 times to get an apartment, and after they came to the Zviller Rebbe, they got an apartment. The son of the Zviller Rebbe, Reb Shlomo, he continued his father's work as the next Zviller Rebbe and is buried in the same cemetery next to his father. And today there's also a Zviller Rebbe in Jerusalem. Reb Chaim Shaul later escaped the Soviet Union and became one of the most influential teachers in the Chabad movement, helping to strengthen Jewish life and learning in ways that Soviets could never stop. And this story tells us something very deep about what it means to keep Shabbos. Reb Gedalia Moshe wouldn't break Shabbos to save himself, but to save another Jew that was different. And in the end, both of them were saved, showing that when we act with complete faith and love for one another, salvation can come in unexpected ways. Be'ezrat Hashem. So I have one more story for you. It's a story about the holy Rebbe Moshe. You know, just saying the words Rebbe Moshe, Zchuto yagen aleinu, in his merit it should keep us safe and protect us. No one was like Rebbe Moshe. You know, sometimes, my friends, the holiest light shines in the darkest of the night. Rebbe Moshe was going to travel to visit some poor families. Even though he had almost nothing for himself, every day Rebbe Moshe would go around and collect a few coins to try to help other Jews. And it was one of those winter nights where it's very cold, it goes straight into your bones. And the moon was hiding behind the clouds. The wind was blowing. But Reb Zusha, he just kept walking and singing nigunim to keep himself warm. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, a group of thieves jump out from behind the trees. And these weren't just any thieves. These were broken souls who had fallen so low, they forgot their own holiness. They surrounded Reb Zusha, pointing their weapons at him. And they said, "Give us everything you have." And you know what Reb Zusha did? He smiled, like a father smiling at his children. And then he reached into his pockets and gave them everything, the few coins that he had, and a little dry piece of bread that he was saving for later. And then Reb Zusha started to cry, not just a few tears. He really started crying from the depths of his soul. And one of the thieves, who turned out to be Jewish, his name was Yankele, couldn't take it. Something about this holy Jew crying touched a place in his heart. And Yankele says, "Why are you crying, old man? We didn't hurt you. Did we scare you?" And Reb Zusha says, "Holy brother, I'm crying because the Master of the Universe arranged this whole meeting. He wanted me to help you, to give you what you need. But look what I have. Just a few coins and a dry piece of bread. What kind of help is that? Hashem gave me such an opportunity for chesed, to help another Jew, and that's all I have." And Yankele the thief stood there frozen. His hands were shaking, and he said, "You're crying for us?" And Reb Zusha said, "Of course. Look at how much pain you must be going through, that you need help from me. And here Hashem sends me to help you, and this is all I have? How can I not cry?" And Yankele, he fell to his knees, started crying himself, real crying, from the deepest place in his neshama. And he ran back to his friends, the thieves, and he told them what Reb Zusha had said. And these thieves, they didn't just return the money. They sat with Reb Zusha all night in the forest as he taught them Torah. And not just any Torah, but Torah that speaks to the heart. And he showed them how every Jew has a holy spark, no matter how far they've fallen. And Yankele, the same thief that first approached Reb Zusha, he became not just a student of Reb Zusha, but a real tzaddik himself. And he would travel with Reb Zusha, helping to collect tzedakah for poor families. And whenever somebody would ask him how his life turned around, he would say with tears in his eyes, "I met a man who cried because he couldn't give more to the people who were robbing him. And that's what I learned what real love is." And you know the deepest thing, my friends, years later, when people would ask Reb Zusha about that night, he would say, "Those weren't thieves that robbed me. Those were just holy souls waiting to be awakened. The Master of the Universe just needed somebody to cry for them." See, my sweetest friends, sometimes the biggest light comes from the darkest place. And every soul, no matter how far they've fallen, always has that pintel yid, that eternal spark of holiness that's just waiting to be awakened. And sometimes all it takes is one person to see that spark, to cry for it, to love it back to life. I lie, 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 I lie, lie, I lie, 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 I lie, 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 I lie, 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 I lie, 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 I 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 lie, lie, I lie, 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 I lie, 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 I lie, 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 I lie, lie, I lie, lie. Thank you so much for listening, my sweetest friends. As always, thank you to all the contributors of the podcast, all the people that send in financial contributions and help to support this podcast. Thank you from the deepest place in my heart. May Hashem bless you with revealed good, health, parnasa, chasidish, and achas from your children and grandchildren, shalom bayit, and only revealed good. And also to all the listeners of the podcast. You don't have to send in money to be blessed. Just by listening, may Hashem bless you. And please keep on listening, my friends, and keep on sharing, and keep the light going. and crying for one another, and davening for one another, and singing for one another, and dancing for one another. And Be'ezrat Hashem, have a beautiful week and a beautiful Shabbos. And until next week, sei gesund, my sweetest friends. Take care of yourselves.